The trail in the Great Smoky Mountains was unnervingly alive for December. A damp cold clung to the skin instead of biting like a dry mountain frost. Maya walked first, her eyes glued to the GPS tracker screen. The blue line of her brother Elan's route, uploaded from the cloud a year ago, overlaid the map. They were following his footsteps with meter-perfect precision. Behind her trudged his two friends, Chet, silent and focused, and Ben, whose chatter had died after the first steep climb. Elan had vanished exactly 1 year ago. Not lost, his campsite was found untouched, his tent neatly packed away as if he'd simply evaporated mid-hike. Maya felt she had to walk this path, not to search, to say goodbye. The unsolvable puzzle announced itself quietly. Chet noticed first. "My watch is glitching, says we're not moving." Maya looked at her phone. The navigation app showed their location, a bright blue dot, motionless on the blue route line. But they were walking. Frozen fern crouched underfoot, branches scraped their jackets. She rebooted the app. The dot jumped, leapt 100 meters ahead along the line, then froze again, as if hitting an invisible wall. Ben pulled out an old analog compass. The needle, instead of pointing north, was slowly, inexorably rotating clockwise with a monotonous hiss of friction. "This can't be," Ben muttered. "It's physically impossible." The rules of navigation, cartography, of space itself began to change. They kept walking, no longer checking their devices, just following the trail. But the trail had changed too. Landmarks they should have seen according to the map, a fallen cedar, a scree slope, were absent. Instead, there were different trees, different rocks. The air grew thicker, the scent of pine replaced by a sweetish, rotten smell of decaying wood and damp clay. They emerged into a clearing. It wasn't on any map. And its center lay a flat, blackened stone as if charred from within. The grass around it was stiff and gray like ash-colored hair. On the stone, lying crookedly as if tossed there, was a key with a wooden bear keychain. Maya recognized it instantly. She'd given it to Elan for luck. He always carried it. She picked up the key. The metal was warm despite the icy air. "We're not where we think we are," Chet said quietly. His face was ashen. And then the rules of time changed. Dusk, which usually crept slowly in the mountains, thickened in mere minutes. The forest's shadow fell over them like a black blanket. Within half an hour, deep, impenetrable night had fallen. The sky, usually star-strewn in the mountains, was covered in a velvety, light-absorbing film. They turned on their headlamps. The beams, usually sharp and confident, now seemed liquid, viscous, barely piercing 5 meters ahead. And they heard the silent witness. Footsteps, clear, measured, behind them in the woods. Maya froze. Chet and En did too. The steps continued for 3 more paces, distinct, one after another, then stopped. The rhythm was familiar. 1, 2, pause. 1, 2, 3. It was her own walking rhythm, the one she'd settled into all day, but lagging exactly 3 steps behind. "Hey!" Ben shouted, his voice swallowed by the cottony dark. "Who's there?" In response, a new set of footsteps, now in Chet's rhythm. A heavy, sure step, a pause, a scuff of soul, again with a delay. Something or someone was learning their patterns, copying them with monstrous precision from the gloom. Panic, sharp and sour, rose in Maya's throat. They ran. Their headlamp beams jumped over tree trunks, illuminating patches of moss, roots, but showing no trail. They ran, gasping, and behind them, maintaining the distance, ran their own footsteps, multiplied by the dark, perfectly synchronized with their bursts, stops, stumbles. This wasn't pursuit. It was an echo that had caught up to the original and was now following it, studying it. Maya's headlamp dimmed, flickered, died. Then Ben's, last with a drawn-out hiss, Chet's light failed. They stopped in utter, all-consuming darkness, hearing only their own ragged breaths and silence. The footsteps had ceased.
And at that moment, the clouds tore apart. The cold, merciless light of a full moon flooded the forest. Maya's gaze swept their surroundings, and her mind, already stretched to its limit, recoiled from what it saw. They stood at the edge of a campsite. Their campsite, the very one they'd left that morning. There were their 3 tents pitched in a semicircle by a boulder. There the fire pit with cold ashes. There Ben's backpack leaning against a pine. But they'd covered at least 15 kilometers of rough terrain that day. Walking back in minutes was impossible. And the trees around the camp stood in exact mirrored sequence. The same old pine with the split crown, the same cluster of birches, the same arrangement of stones. It was a flawless copy, or the original. They couldn't tell. From the central tent, Maya's tent, a sound came. Laughter. Loud, carefree, happy laughter. Her brother Ilan's laughter, the exact sound of him cracking up by a campfire, telling absurd stories, the one she hadn't heard in a year. Maya's heart clenched into an icy knot. She took one step forward, then another. Chet grabbed her arm, but she pulled free. She approached the tent. The zipper was closed. From inside spilled the soft yellow glow of a gas lantern, casting a familiar shadow on the nylon fabric, the silhouette of someone sitting, hunched over something. "Ilan," she whispered, her voice breaking. The shadow inside the tent froze. The laughter stopped. Silence hung like a heavy, waiting curtain. The moonlight bathed the duplicate camp, this perfect imprint of their past in which their present was merely an unwelcome echo. The footsteps behind them did not resume. The world held its breath in an impossible equilibrium. And then the shadow in the tent slowly, very slowly, turned its head toward her. The taiga in British Columbia in late September isn't just a forest. It's the breath of the earth itself, cold, damp, and ancient. David, a ranger, knew it like the back of his hand. So when his 8-year-old Lucy vanished among the aspens and firs during a Sunday picnic, he didn't panic immediately. He mobilized everyone: search and rescue, dogs, a helicopter with thermal imaging. 3 days, 72 hours that tore open a black, bottomless pit in his chest, wider with every passing hour. They found her on the 4th morning, 10 kilometers from the campsite, in a remote part of the preserve where even David rarely set foot. She was sitting on a moss-covered boulder by a creek, barefoot, wearing the same bright yellow jacket. When he sobbed and swept her into his arms, the girl's body was warm, almost hot despite the overnight frost. There wasn't a single scratch on her. Even the soles of her bare feet were clean, pink, as if she hadn't run over kindling and stones, but had floated above the earth. "Daddy," her little voice sounded surprised, but not frightened. "You were calling so loudly, I just went to look at a chickadee." The unsolvable riddle began right there. "You were gone for 3 days, Sunshine," David said, wrapping her in a rescue blanket. Lucy frowned, her smooth brow wrinkling. "What 3 days? We just got here. I stepped away for 5 minutes. I got bored while you and Mom were unpacking the sandwiches." At the hospital in Vancouver, the riddle turned into a quiet nightmare. The tests were flawless: 0 dehydration, normal glucose levels. Muscle tissue showed no signs of exhaustion, as if her metabolism had paused for 3 days. The doctors shrugged, talked about stress, amnesia, the unique resilience of a child's body. David stayed silent. He smelled her hair. It didn't smell of shampoo or the forest. It smelled of damp clay, old stone, and something sweetish, slightly rancid, like a forgotten root cellar. While Lucy slept, a nurse handed him a bag with her personal effects. Besides the jacket, there was only a clump of moss taken from her jeans pocket. The moss felt unnaturally cold and vibrantly alive to the touch, as if freshly picked. David, being a ranger, was intrigued.
He took the sample to his biologist friend. The friend called a day later, his voice strange and strained. "Dave, this is a Homolanthium nevensis, a species not recorded in this region since the end of the last glacial period. It's considered extinct. And this specimen, it's not just alive, it's in perfect, pristine condition, as if it was picked 10,000 years ago." The silent witness. The moss was evidence from another time.
At home, something else began. Lucy returned to life, but with caveats. She was afraid to fall asleep without a light, said she heard whispering outside her window.
"He whispers with the trees, Daddy. He's teaching them to talk."
She called it he, not a man, not an animal. He. One night, David heard mutterings. He looked into her room. Lucy was sitting on her bed, her eyes open but vacant. From her lips flowed a stream of guttural, clicking, hissing sounds. It wasn't a language. It was an imitation of speech from something that had no tongue. Or it was the speech of the forest itself, filtered through a child's vocal cords. In the morning, she remembered nothing. And on the wall above her bed, on the wallpaper, a damp stain had appeared. Not just dampness, it was a complex, detailed structure, a map. David recognized the outlines of the provincial park, the hills, the creek, but woven among the familiar contours were new trails leading deeper to where topographic maps showed only the white void of uncharted territory. The mold smelled the same as her hair had back in the forest. The rules began to change. The girl's reality and the world's reality no longer aligned. She had brought back different laws. As psychologists suggested, place therapy, a gentle return to the location to reinforce a sense of safety in Lucy's mind. David agreed with a heavy heart. They stood at the tree line by that same boulder. Sunlight filtered through the pine needles, dappling the ground. Lucy held his hand. She was calm, too calm. She looked at the forest not as a place of trauma, but as a familiar, even boring backyard. "He let me go right here," she said suddenly, in a simple, matter-of-fact tone, pointing to a huge, gnarled pine with roots exposed by erosion. David went cold. "Who, Sunshine?" "Him, the man from the trees. He said I don't fit anymore." "Don't fit for what?" "To stay. He said I'm wrong now because people looked for me, because you called. Your calling was sticky. It stuck to me and spoiled the quiet." She spoke of 3 days in a parallel world as a failed interview. David turned, following her innocent gaze. There, 20 meters away, in the deep shadow between trunks, stood something. It wasn't an animal. It was a coagulation of shadows, woven from roots, moss, deadfall, and shifting light. It had rough, approximate outlines of a human figure, but twice a man's height. The details were fluid. A branch twitched like a finger. Moss swayed like hair in a non-existent breeze. It didn't move. It simply was, and it watched, not with eyes, with its entire forest body. This was the silent witness to everything that had happened. Not an abductor, not a monster, more like a warden or collector who had taken the girl for a time, assessed her, and returned her as defective because her father had spoiled the quiet with his calling. The silhouette shuddered. Not a step. It simply dissolved like a shadow when a cloud passes over the sun. 1 second it was there, the embodiment of the forest itself, ancient and alive. The next, only trees, moss, and silence. But the silence was different now. It was attentive, saturated. In it, one could hear the faintest rustling, not of wind, but of something creeping over bark, growing at an unnatural pace, observing. Lucy shivered and squeezed his hand tighter. "Daddy," she whispered,
And for the first time since her return, her voice held a genuine, childish, ice-cold fear. "He's listening to you now. He wants to know why your calling was so loud, why you didn't let me stay in the quiet." David looked at his daughter, at her clean, unblemished cheeks, into her eyes in whose depths now swam reflections of a world not our own. He understood he hadn't gotten her back. He'd gotten back a vessel that had visited the taiga, and the taiga now knew everything about him. And it had deemed his love an intrusive and noisy, sticky error. And now it was studying that error. Through his daughter, through the moss in the walls, through the whisperings of the trees outside the window of their warm, safe, illusory home.
The maps in the Search and Rescue Operations Center were studded with pins. Red, last known contact. Yellow, key search points. Green, where something was found. Backpack, track, scrap of clothing. Black, where they'd found nothing. Rick Bannister had stared at this mosaic of 20 years' work in the Oregon woods, and something clicked in his mind, honed on patterns and anomalies. He spent the night at his computer, feeding the coordinates of every unresolved disappearance from 2 decades into a geospatial analysis program. The data danced, clustered, rejected his hunches, until he overlaid a logarithmic grid. Then they fell into a perfect, inexorable pattern. A logarithmic spiral, the golden ratio, the shape of a nautilus shell, a galaxy, and, as it now appeared, of human disappearances in the Willamette National Forest. The first case, 2003, on the innermost, barely there coil. The most recent, 2 days ago, 15-year-old Emmy Carter, on the outermost. The spiral grew, expanded with mathematical precision. Its epicenter, calculated by the program, sat in a virgin tract, 15 miles from the nearest trail, a place marked on maps as impenetrable thicket. The unsolvable riddle. Nature has no use for geometric purity. Neither does a criminal. This was a signature, but not a human one. He told no one. The crazy old man, the conspiracy theorist, that wouldn't help Emmy. He called in for personal time, took his old rover, and drove toward the coordinates. The road ended quickly, then on foot, with GPS, compass, and a cold weight in his gut. The forest here was different. Not frightening, but attentive. Birds didn't sing, wind didn't rustle leaves, only the crunch of his own steps on deadfall, loud as gunshots. The GPS receiver showed precise movement toward the target. 500 meters from the epicenter, the compass needle shuddered and began a smooth, slow rotation. And he stepped into the clearing.
It was perfectly round, about 30 meters across. Not a blade of grass, not a weed, only smooth, compacted earth, the color of old plaster. The air was dead still, odorless, no scent of pine, mushrooms, damp, sterile. At the very center lay an object. Rick moved closer. It was a piece of obsidian, but not sharp, not fractured, smooth as if polished by a river. Yet there were no rivers here. Almost black, but with an inner, blood-crimson sheen. It was warm, not from the sun, from within, like a living body. Rick didn't touch it. The silent witness. He circled it and pulled out his radio. "Base, this is Bannister. Comms check, over." Silence. Not radio silence, absolute silence. He keyed the mic, in his headset, hissing, and then cutting through it, his own younger voice full of adrenaline. "I see a red jacket. Repeat, I see..." That was his voice from the search for little Jessie Foster in 2011. Then another fragment, more recent. "Tracks end at the creek. Need a canine, Jeem." voices layered over each other, fragments from different years, different operations, weaving into an eerie choir of his professional life. The rules had changed. The radio waves carried not the present, but a washed and reassembled past. He tore the headset off. Time had slipped. He couldn't tell if 10 minutes or an hour had passed. The sun, piercing the canopy, hung at zenith unnaturally long. He had to leave, now. He turned, oriented by the sun, the compass still spinning, and strode away from the clearing, straight through the woods. He walked for a long time, until a stitch burned in his side, until his breath rasped. Tree trunks flashed by, branches whipped his face. He checked the GPS. The device showed he was moving in an arc. He tried to fight it, headed due west. After 40 minutes of hard trekking, pushing through another curtain of ferns, he emerged onto the perfectly round clearing, onto the warm obsidian at its center.
Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at his throat. He ran, changed directions, blazed marks on trees, plunged into thickets. Each time the outcome was the same. The clearing. It wasn't a place on a map. It was a condition, a geometric truth with no exit. The sky darkened, not the usual way. Twilight didn't linger, it fell like a curtain. And when Rick looked up, he saw stars, or rather their absence. Where Orion's belt or the Big Dipper should blaze, unfamiliar constellations hung, arranged in strange, unsettling patterns. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at his throat. He ran, changed directions, blazed marks on trees, plunged into thickets. Each time the outcome was the same. The clearing. It wasn't a place on a map. It was a condition, a geometric truth with no exit. The sky darkened, not the usual way. Twilight didn't linger, it fell like a curtain. And when Rick looked up, he saw stars, or rather their absence. Where Orion's belt or the Big Dipper should blaze, unfamiliar constellations hung, arranged in strange, unsettling patterns. They mirrored the spiral on the ground. The rules of the cosmos had changed too. And then he saw them. From the edge of the clearing, from the absolute black of the forest, silhouettes appeared one by one, pale as moonlight on fog, semi-translucent. A teenager in a torn band t-shirt for a group no one has listened to in a decade. A woman in hiking pants, hair disheveled. A young man with a backpack. Jessie Foster in her little red jacket. Emmy Carter. All of them. Everyone he had searched for. Everyone he had never found. They did not approach. They stood, arrayed along an invisible curve, and watched him. In their hollow eyes there was no malice, no sorrow, only a vacant, will-less waiting. They were points on the spiral, static, complete. Rick understood. He hadn't found the epicenter. The epicenter had found him. The latest, freshest searcher, drawn in by the logic of the pattern he himself had deciphered. The call wasn't a riddle. It was an invitation to his place. He sank to his knees on the cold gray earth. He took his field journal and pen from his breast pocket. The flashlight clipped to his belt through a weak yellowing beam. He opened the journal to the last blank page and began to write in large letters so the shaking in his hands wouldn't render it illegible. The voices in his head, his own, from the radio, from the past, fell silent. Only the clearing's silence remained, and the quiet presence of those who had already become part of the pattern. He finished writing, closed the journal, placed it beside him. Then he raised his head and looked at the pale silhouettes. He felt no more fear, only a cold geometric clarity. He was the new point, the last point of the old spiral, and perhaps the first of a new one. He took a step forward toward the center of the clearing, toward the warm black stone.
The silhouettes didn't stir. They simply observed. The next morning, his rover was found at the end of a logging road. The search for Rick Bannister began 6 hours later. His field journal was found 3 days later, 5 miles from the rover, in deep woods where he had apparently thrown it, trying to create a false trail. On the last page, beneath strange calculations and coordinates, in a neat, firm hand was written, "Stop looking. We are all here." Beneath these words, barely visible, the pencil tip had traced a tiny, perfect logarithmic spiral, and at its very heart, a tiny point, like a black, bottomless pin.